science fiction. We make no guarantees, however, how long it will remain fiction. Fiction. Fiction.
Cerebral simulation salutations to all you cognonauts out there, and welcome to another episode of Exofathom. I am Nick, and I am joined, as always, with my lovely co-hosts. Ayla, how are you?
I'm doing just fine. How about you today?
Wonderful, wonderful. Happy Monday. And we got Mike here. How's it going, man?
Oh, I'm hanging in there. I don't know what I'm looking at. Am I looking at a lamp, or am I looking at two faces?
Yes.
Oh,
That's exactly right.
It's a candlestick.
It is a candle. Could be a candlestick. Could be two faces. Could be something completely else. It's all in the mind, right? And that's what we're going to be getting into today. I wanted to talk about the concept of Tulpa, or Tulpas for the plural, which is basically this concept of the ability of dumping psychic energy into a sort of psychic body that then turns physical. I think the best way that I can relate the concept is the well-known idea of an imaginary friend. I think, pardon me, a lot of kids have imaginary friends when they're little, and it's sort of the same concept, but taken to its occult level, where a practitioner called a tulpamancer will dump their psychic energy into creating what's called a thought form in order for that thought form to manifest to various different aims. Some could be in the aid of a task or a project. It can also be to help you release certain emotional blocks or psychic blocks. And sometimes, if you're not careful, they can take on a life of their own. And it was something that was brought up to my attention because in a podcast I do with Keelan and Dijon, shout outs to Keelan and Dijon, Screen Time Continuum, we watched this movie called The Empty Man. And it was a throwaway line in that movie where they talk about the main character being a tulpa, which is basically a physical manifestation of psychic energy. And he was created by this cult to, well, I won't regale you with the story, but in essence, he's created through psychic energy by a cult. And that got me thinking, okay, so what is this thing? I've heard, of imaginary friends before, but I've never heard of a tulpa. And it is pretty interesting. There's not a whole lot on the literature, but it kind of took me into a whole different branch of ideas, just like any Exofathom show probably would. So I wanted to get to the bulk of the conversation with you guys. So first I want to cover the concept of thoughts, and then a little bit of Buddhism to lay the groundwork for how this Theosophy views tulpas, and then we can talk about the theosophical idea of the tulpa and some of the manifestations as well. So it should be an interesting conversation, hopefully. So my question to you guys, and this is the first question, and this might take the entire episode if we really wanted it to, but Ayla, what are thoughts?
What are thoughts? You know me, I could probably expound upon that all night. But I would say in a nutshell, thoughts are going to be tethered to consciousness, also something that's hard to describe. And so I feel like thoughts are, kind of like consciousness observing itself, if you were to say, because consciousness is what filters the physical world, our experiences, our memories. And so thoughts are little statements, I guess, that are generated by those experiences, those learned adventures that we have. So that's kind of what I would say. It's like a thought is consciousness speaking to itself.
Interesting. Yeah. Mike, what is a thought?
I don't know, man. Something like that. Just real quick though, like, so some of these tulpas we can also, it's like The Shining, like Tony from The Shining and all the little
Mhm.
ghosts, that
Yes.
stuff.
Tony.
Yeah,
Who was
you know.
Tony?
Red
Oh.
Rum, the little imaginary
Oh
friend.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I know another Tony, and I was like, I did not see that character in that movie.
Tony the Tiger, he's in there.
Mhm.
He's in the kitchen.
Oh, okay. Missed it. Exotic meats. Sorry. Wrong. So wrong.
So yeah, thought tethered down to one's own personal experience, but it's also leveraged on the consciousness and intelligence, like all the information that it has that it can pick up and read, and it's remembered past experiences, I guess. It's too, you need a language for it, right? Like when you experience an emotion, you don't consider that a thought, but a thought is something that is either visually communicated in your brain or linguistically communicated in your brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it has to maybe center around an idea, or maybe not. There might be like a theme of the thought overall. But yeah, it's a communication of the consciousness to itself. I do like that reflexivity in a structured language.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a term for that. Man, oh man, I was looking at it and I totally forgot it. Damn it. I'm so sorry. There is a term for that concept of the self talking to the self sort of idea. But I thought this was an interesting question because it's one of those things. Do you think about that? I mean, I know that philosophers have in the past, and it does seem like a question that could be talked in circles for a good hour and a half if we really wanted to.
It gets very difficult to
Oh yeah.
begin somewhere, right? Like, yeah, because you would have to start to have some sort of axioms to build up on this notion of a thought.
Mm-hmm. And of course, it gets real fun when you start thinking about the implications of thought as defined by axiom 1 or 2 or 3. So I think, I always like real life applications of something, because depending on how you define a thought and how you think of our thoughts, you can start to rethink a lot of other stuff too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. I think it's kind of a rich question just to ponder, and for people listening at home, I think it's a good question to think about as well. I mean, you're thinking about what thoughts are. That is a thought. It's like some sort of, I don't know, inception going on.
Yeah, think about it.
Classify thoughts too. All sorts of other things come out, because some thoughts are good to have and some thoughts are bad to have, at least within some like societal structures, right? But those are still basic thoughts.
Well, and that's a really good point, Mike, because you could also say that it is our thoughts which color things as opposite to one another, like good and bad, because like all thoughts are just thoughts. And I think there's meditations that I've listened to where they talk about this like non-neutral observance of thoughts. And I've heard of the term, what is it? It's the unbiased internal observer or something like that. So it's like, you have all your thoughts, right? But if you objectify them as kind of separate from you, and you are the being that is witnessing these thoughts and receiving them, then it becomes very interesting, because you create space between yourself and the thoughts, and that space allows you, I think, a little more agency in a lot of things.
Did you go to Landmark Forum too?
No, dude, I just had 4 months of suffering. That's made me really wise. I'm really proud of myself today. So.
Oh, okay. That's the main supposition for the Landmark Forum for sure. The concept of the detached observer, I believe it's in the Dhammapada, talking about regard your thoughts as ships sailing, on the sea.
You could start to build filters around that. It becomes easier, right? You become more aware that there's this thinking thing and there's a difference between like the thinking thing in you than the thing that you call you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Those could be two separate things, but are also the same thing.
Mm-hmm. And there's a really lovely book. I might have mentioned it before, but it's called The Untethered Soul. And I believe that's where I got this idea of, they call it the indwelling being,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of cool because it's like, oh, maybe I'm just like a little Ayla pod or alien inside of this human, shell. And really, I do find it interesting in some of like the esoteric documentaries that I've watched. They talk about recognition of the indwelling being, right? So that which is a little bit separate from your day-to-day life and your egoic self. And they talk about tapping into this other being as a way to maybe access other dimensions where that could exist or something like that. Like, I think it was in that Alien documentary that we did a show on,
Yeah.
Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, I think.
Yeah. And maybe I don't know.
Yeah.
But
it is.
I yeah. Sorry.
Oh,
Somebody talk.
I know. Right? Ayla,
sorry.
what were you saying?
Last point. They talked a little bit about consciousness as a way to travel through space and time. And that's the first time I kind of like heard it phrased like that, which does sound crazy. But then it's like, is it any crazier than these intangible thought forms that we can never be 100% sure other people have or don't have? Right?
Hmm.
That was it.
Yeah, there's the thoughtful person or the overthinker, right? You can search.
Mhm.
So I'm going to set this up in like Aristotle, right? Like Aristotle's Ethics. Jesus, words are hard.
Yeah.
So you have the thoughtful or like the overthinker, right? The person who thinks too much. Sorry, yeah, you have the overthinker and the thoughtless person, someone who I guess is more based on instincts, or you can
Impulse.
impulse maybe too, but think of it more as like the NPC if I'm going to like make it a derogatory term, I guess. But that could be impulse, instinct, or simply passing of information through the brain that's received by an authority figure to action, right? Like an automatic human. And then in the middle, you have the thoughtful person, which is like the mean of it, which I guess is a good way to, I don't even know where this started, to go back to like, what is a thought? Like you have to have like this collection of thoughts. Consciousness is traveling through time, right? Collections of thoughts, this collection of thoughts, or is your consciousness maybe? And this consciousness, we give it a label, the name, which is bizarre to me. Like all it is, all you are, all we are is just a collection of ideas, right? The meat bag at sentient meat, like True Detective idea. Yeah, it's just a collection of ideas wrapped in a human shell, meat shell.
A meat shell. Yes. Well, and I like that you brought up like a series of thoughts through time and back to time travel. So I'm getting a little bit of like PTSD with this injury. It's been like close to 4 months. The initial injury was really traumatic. I held my knee in my hand as it was like poking out of not my skin, but just like under it. And it was traumatic. I was in agony and screaming. So now when I do PT, sometimes I will basically, it feels like I'm transported to that moment. I know I'm not, but everything is still so vivid and it just pops up out of nowhere. And so I was thinking ideas. I don't know what would separate like an idea from a memory, but I feel like they're kind of the same thing. And when you think about those like traumatic flashbacks that people with hardcore PTSD get, I wonder if their like consciousness is time traveling, if there's like a key there. That's a side random question. I don't know.
I mean, so like thoughts.
Well, memory is just time travel, right?
It has to be.
So.
It has to be part of it.
Yeah. And then the thought of whatever makes that occur, I think the thought can be like the middle ground, right? You might have a thought about a memory, then you tap into that memory that goes back, takes you back to that time. Kind of sucks that you can only go backwards, so you can't have future memories, right? Wouldn't that be great?
That would be cool. Well, and then you start thinking about like embodied memory. This is the thing where like our muscles remember cues and implicit signs and things like that. And that's really fun to ponder because yeah, if memory can be experienced on the physical and on the consciousness, what does that imply? What does that say about the world?
Can thoughts be physical?
Well, that's
Sure.
kind of the whole crux of this conversation.
Bringing it back around.
yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
But yeah, and I mean, like, and that's my follow-up question to you guys. I mean, aside from the fact that we could probably still talk about this for a while, but my second question to you guys is going to be, and this is the crux of the Theosophical philosophy, which we'll talk about in a moment. Are thoughts things?
Mm.
And I know that this is very vague, like linguistics going on right now, but I think that's probably purposely so, just to elicit some sort of reaction. But I do wonder, are thoughts things?
I'm gonna try not to step on your toes because it seems like a good way to talk about forms.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure. The thought is a thing.
A thought is a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, the thought. I don't think it's like a sentient. I don't think it's a conscious thing.
Mm.
I think it's it has a beginning and an end. That's not. It may not be exactly tied to time. But it definitely has a start and an ending, and can be contextualized in a thing.
Mm. Yeah. I would tend to agree. I don't know what a thing is, but yeah, I mean, like, then again, I don't know what a thought is either. So yeah, they're probably the same thing.
Do we want to define a thing?
I totally looked
No,
it
you
up.
don't need to define a thing. It's okay.
We should
The
be able. We should
definition's
define a
super
thing.
Cool.
I'm just gonna go into a postmodern fucking black hole here.
No, but can I just define it? It's a 2-sentence thing, but it's I never really looked up the definition of
thing
thing.
is a 2-sentence thing.
Well, there's 2 sentences to describe it. It's a noun. A thing is often an object that one need not, cannot, or does not wish to give a specific name to. Interesting. The other definition is that it is an inanimate material object as distinct from a living sentient being. So they practically set it apart from sentience, consciousness.
No, we're things. Get out of here. The human's a thing. Yeah. That's by the dictionary definition, right? Like, so we can you can have multiple definitions for something as long as we're clear in what we're defining it, right? It's why Sartre's books are so freaking dense, right? Because he just spends the beginning defining stuff.
Well, it's actually dense because he won an award over Simone de Beauvoir, who wrote a much shorter piece, and his was like verbose as all hell. And the all male panel said, "Yeah, that's prioritized creativity over profundity and conciseness of thought." So that's why he's verbose. But also, I just like in the definition, the last thing on the first definition was something you cannot name, or you can't really like put your like classify. And in that case, I do think thoughts are things, because it's how do you define it in like an easy functional kind of way? You can't.
And in a computer science, from a computer science perspective, it's like your base class. It's the most generic encapsulation of whatever, right? Yeah, it would
It's
be
a
like
catch-all
thing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, and again, this is all just to kind of lay the groundwork for the concept of a tulpa. Obviously, we want to talk about what thoughts are, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the Platonism and Aristotelian. Oh boy, here we go. Aristotelian. Yes, thank you. I look at the letters and I'm like, okay, I can't pronounce that, but I know what it is.
I was tripping up.
It throws me off every time.
I was tripping up over it like 2 minutes ago, so don't feel
bad. So let's jump into what these guys said about the concept of a thought. And these Platos and Aristotles. Plato was, according to Platonism, thinking is a spiritual activity in which Platonic forms and their interrelations are discerned and inspected. This activity is understood as a form of silent inner speech in which the soul talks to itself. So much like Ayla's self talking to self, or consciousness talking to consciousness. Platonic forms are seen as universals that exist in a changeless realm different from the sensible world. Examples include the forms of goodness, beauty, unity, and sameness. On this view, the difficulty of thinking consists in being able to grasp the Platonic forms and to distinguish them as the original from the mere imitations found in the sensory world. That kind of, you mean like the concept of beauty versus seeing something that's beautiful, right? And this means, for example, distinguishing beauty itself from derivative images of beauty. I could have just read that sentence. One problem for this view is to explain how humans can learn and think about Platonic forms belonging to a different realm. Plato himself tries to solve this problem through his theory of recollection, according to which the soul already was in contact with the Platonic forms before and is therefore able to remember what they are like. Conversely, Aristotle's take, unless you guys want to chime in about Plato.
Yeah, maybe just like for a second, because
go
I
for it.
didn't follow all the way. I don't know if you were to summarize his, because okay, sorry, I'm just trying to like.
So in summation, I from what I was reading, the main takeaways are it's the soul speaking to the inner self speaking to the self, or a soul connection talking to itself. But he also talks about this idea that Platonic forms are like these immortal ideas that manifest themselves in the sensory world, but they're actually something outside of the sensory world. So the concept of beauty isn't just a pretty painting. It's like this abstract idea that's looming over a human's head, sort of thing. Kind of like you're plucking it from the ether. And the only way to really understand what beauty is not to just understand what the pretty picture looks like, but it's also to understand the concept of beauty itself.
I see.
If that makes any sense.
Yes, you're jogging like so much stuff that I've read about that. And now there it is, gone again. But I like this idea that he brings in the spirit, right? Because like consciousness, it's a very like atheistic kind of way to think about it. Here, by adding the component of spirit or this connection to something else, yeah, it creates kind of like this, I don't know, it takes it to a different level, I guess. And I appreciate you like summing up the beauty thing, because I was like getting lost in that.
Oh yeah, I know.
The minutia a little bit, but that makes a lot more sense.
I was just going to ask, what's the difference between a spirit and a consciousness? But I don't think we.
They're both things.
Okay, great. Thanks for clearing that up for me.
Yep, totally.
Our Exophathoms, we should bring that back and just have it be like, remember at minute 10 when we could have gone in this whole other route? All right, let's do that. Because
branching story. Well, what would be? Yeah, we could do that, and then like on the YouTube video, have like a little
choose your own adventure.
Yeah, like a choose your own venture. Make video mazes for people. You know?
Oh shoot!
Dude,
Yeah, choose your own adventure podcast though. That doesn't exist. That'd be dope.
Trademark 2021 Exofathom.
Yes.
Yep. October, Monday, the 8:38. No, but no, for sure. Because especially like, let's say you're listening to the podcast and all of a sudden you're like, spirits, blah, I don't care, you know. Well, you could just skip this or go to like another channel of thought.
Yeah. Explore another Platonic form.
Right.
And I do like this concept of Platonic forms because I'm trying to tie all of this stuff together, so forgive me if it doesn't seamlessly go, but the concept of Platonic forms to me kind of reminded me of this fifth dimensional space. This idea that there's abstraction kind of permeating everything around us and is just kind of living in this other dimensional space. And that becomes important when we talk about the concept of Tulpas, because my supposition is that and I didn't come up with this, but from my research and putting this show together, my supposition is that you're tapping into that fifth dimensional space to create something psychically.
Mm.
I like to get comic booky about it. I like to think of Platonic Forms like some of like the larger gods in Marvel, and some like the larger cosmic beings, like Eternity or Living Tribunal, or like those sorts of like really big cosmic notions where like you jump into this fifth dimension, you find this living, breathing thing called beauty, you talk to it, and then you bring down a little bit of it into you manifest it into this form, into this reality, right? And that would be the same thing as like in the Marvel comics when they start to go crazy adventures and stuff, start to go out cosmically. It's not like those things are just in the universe but abstractly, and they coalesce all together to create one single god type form.
I like that. Yeah. And
Well,
I do like what you said about just one. I do like what you said about kind of like plucking that abstraction and then putting it into the physical third density so that we can witness it.
Yep. Yeah. And we like like those Platonic forms, we get all around to the same definition of the thing of beauty, but in through our own prism of perspective, right? But it's still that root idea that you're communicating with.
Right. Sorry, Ayla.
Oh, as Mike was talking, I was looking at the show notes, and it's like the theory of recollection. Kind of, you're just giving it you're fleshing it out more, which he says it's the soul was already in contact with the Platonic forms before, and they're remembering what they were like. And that's just kind of, it's actually really beautiful, that like everything that we create and manifest and think, those are actually memories. Haha, here's my space time travel connection. But they're memories to before. And in theory, if we go back to where we were before when we die, then that's also like an interesting kind of way to create your world.
Yeah, we're plucking from the absolute.
Yeah, totally.
If we talk about the Itzhak Bentov philosophy and the Project Gateway, there's my one per episode.
It's just funny because I remember Nick was trying to figure out what to do for the first couple episodes to launch this podcast. And so it's like, I think we're like kind of pleased with ourselves that it just is like a really good way to jump into all this stuff because it lays a lot of foundational stuff.
Yeah. Well, and it seems to be that, somehow everything ties together. I mean, I think we're actually officially 100 episodes in. So,
hey,
if we include the exo bits, this is episode 71. Yeah.
Hold on. Are we getting? We're not getting any stipends from like the Gateway program in the future, right?
We should.
We're doing all this research. We're only lacking. If we get money, we can definitely do some experiments.
Way more. Yeah, totally. But yeah, I think it's interesting the way, most of the episodes that we've done have all tied and kind of circled around this concept. And, even the name of this podcast, Exofathom. It's to me, it's like to try to illustrate that what we're trying to put our finger on. Obviously, it's abstract, so it's very difficult to identify what we're talking about. But the concept of the fifth dimension, the absolute, sunyata, collective consciousness, gateway experience, all of these things that we've talked about are still kind of pointing in the same direction. And I think that the interconnectivity of it all is really interesting.
Yep. We're all as one, pretty much.
All is one. Yeah. All relates to the other. Yeah. So let's get Aristotle's take on this. Aristotelians hold that the mind is able to think about something by instantiating the essence of the object of thought. So while thinking about trees, the mind instantiates treeness. This instantiation does not happen in matter, as is the case for actual trees, but in the mind. Though the universal essence instantiated in both cases are the same. In contrast to Platonism, these universals are not understood as Platonic forms existing in a changeless, intelligible world. Instead, they only exist to extend what they are instantiated, or extend that they are instantiated. Jesus. The mind learns to discriminate universals through abstraction from experience. This explanation avoids various of the objections raised against Platonism. Conceptualism, which is tied to Aristotelianism, holds that thinking consists in mentally evoking concepts. Some of these concepts may be innate, but most have been learned through abstraction from sense experience before they can be used in thought. So I guess
Come again.
Aristotle's, yeah. I guess the crux of Aristotle, I do like the concept of treeness, but Aristotle's sort of take, which seems to be two different takes almost, is like you're instantiating the essence of the thought. So when you're thinking about a tree, you're instantiating treeness. You're trying to put your mind in, you know,
Inside a tree.
Inside a tree. I don't think that that's right. But you're kind of you're reconstructing the essence of a tree, and you're doing it in your head. And Aristotle would say that both the energies of the physical tree and the tree in your head are the same thing.
Yeah, you're getting really close to what, again, like computer scientists do, or programmers do. You experience a problem, you try to abstract from that problem what a base problem is, right? And then you try to keep that solution in mind for other problems. So if you see problems like trees, for example, you try to embody that treeness or the problemness of it, like that root problem that you're trying to solve. And I'm sure this works the same too for psychology things, right? But yeah, you try to get into the essence of whatever the thing you're dealing with is, and once you have that thing, you can then in future experiences know exactly what you're dealing with, because you have that base thought or that treeness, right? Doesn't matter the type of tree, you just know that it's a tree.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like making a shortcut, sort of. Yeah, make it easier for your brain to process the ideas. I did mess up a little bit, so I just want to say, in contrast to Platonism, these universals are not understood as Platonic forms existing in a changeless, intelligible world. Instead, they only exist to the extent that they are instantiated. So I guess the concept is that they're not, just like these abstracts that have been here forever and, since time immemorial. They only exist once they are evoked.
It seems to be very language based. Like we're getting close to like Wittgenstein's issue, or language, where you have tree, but we can never exactly
know the treeness.
yeah, because you and I have different notions of tree, right? But that is dependent on the language that you're using. So as you get more into complex ideas.
I feel like I used to know more about this, and I'm just like so confused by this word instantiates. And treeness isn't helping because, well, okay, so like
replace it with summon.
Yeah.
So while thinking about trees, the mind summons treeness.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of tied to kind of like the mind's way of organizing the world and like categories. Is that kind of like what you were talking about, Mike, with programming, that you have to like define treeness in order to start solving issues with trees, or not?
Yeah, but it's based off of experience with trees. So we define treeness through multiple experiences with trees, and then you take that treeness and you see something that might look like a tree.
Okay.
If it fits, then it is a tree.
This is experiential knowledge. Basically, like before there were books about trees where I can read what every human in the world observed about trees, all I have to go off is my experience. My experiential knowledge creates the foundation by which I can instantiate treeness.
And you can call that book, Treeness.
Yeah, there it is. I could.
Yeah, it's made
Okay.
of trees.
Yeah.
Unless you have like a Kindle book. I mean, we're in the future now.
Yeah, that is true. But that was all to bring into this. Again, I wanted to lay the groundwork. We're talking about what thought is, and I do like these kind of dueling ideas that Plato would think that there's some sort of immutable, abstract concepts that float above us that we kind of bring down from the heavens to the earth, a la Prometheus, whereas Aristotle would say that the concepts really arise from experience and then they exist only when they are summoned. So almost the concept of like sunyata or the absolute or the void, they don't just linger in the fifth dimension. They're actually just not there at all until they're summoned into being.
Mhm. Well, and I like the last sentence, which I'll just read again. Some of these
Mhm.
concepts may be innate, but most have to be learned through abstraction from sense experience before they can be used in thought. So the Aristotelian sense of things is that our senses build everything. Yeah, like you're saying, there's no fifth dimension. It's all what you see, what you taste, what you hear, and all that stuff, which
Right.
takes away all the spirit.
Well, it
That
kind of
makes
does,
sense.
but he also talks about the universal essence being the same with the physical and the mental, which is interesting.
And you can always take the perspective that emptiness, that void, that sunyata is the fifth dimension. Because they're still talking about this absolute, it's just whether or not it's filled with stuff
Right.
from the Platonic sense,
Or
or
it's
if
empty.
filled with, with nothing
Right.
from the Aristotelian sense.
But couldn't it also be taken to mean that, like, for Plato, there is this absolute that is filtered through us. So our conceptions of it will never really be on point. Whereas with maybe Aristotle, they are the same because it's based off of like the real world.
Well, you're still trying to get to the point of treeness, right? So you're still filtering through that sensory experience. But my treeness and your treeness are two different treenesses. But if we both read the same book called Treeness, then we can communicate about this idea
Of
called
treeness.
treeness, yes.
But
Yeah.
which would correspond to the actual truth of treeness.
But we might have two different truths about the treeness. We might have this is where you get into Wittgenstein's problems with language.
Right.
We're communicating the same idea, but through different.
Do you know what Aristotle said about that issue, Nick? Or
No, I didn't know. I don't know what Aristotle said about Liechtenstein.
or about the linguistic problem? Okay.
Oh, no, I didn't go
comes-
deeper than that. Yeah.
Well, so Wittgenstein is far more modern
Mhm.
than Aristotle.
No, but I'm saying like Aristotle would have tackled like problems of knowledges of other mind. I just don't remember like what his thoughts on it were. Because a lot of this stuff too, like it gets into the heart of knowledge. So there's a lot of like metaphysical digressions that they each could have taken, and it's just fascinating. I know like Plato, Aristotle, because of those two, you see a lot of like diverging schools that emerged. So it's very rich, and it's like I remember when I was studying this like Greek philosophy class or something like that. I had like a poster board, or not poster board, but like a 11 by 8 sheet of paper, and I just used it as a visual sheet. And every time a new thought emerged that was contrasting, so like something I read from Plato and then the exact opposite of Aristotle, I just started mapping it on this thing, and then you can just see, just how different your, I don't know, like how different morality and social ethics and I don't know, metaphysics and all that stuff can branch out based on these fundamental differences, which is just cool. It's just cool stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but before we get too deep into linguistics and semantics
Logistics
and all that
of
stuff.
linguistics.
Yes, the logistics of linguistics. Let's move on to the sort of the foundation of the concept of the Tulpas, which, yes, we kind of got into the idea of thought, and now this is going to get into the more esoteric side of things, bringing in sort of a religious practice. And from what I could read when I was researching Tulpas, it seems that based on Theosophy took a lot of Buddhism, particular Tibetan Buddhism, and westernized it into a sort of mysticism that was really popular with Europeans. So it would do us a good service to talk about the Buddhism that Theosophy borrowed from, in order to zone in a little bit more on the concept of the Tulpas. And so the branch of Buddhism that really has been taken from is called Vajrayana, Vajrayana, Vajrayana. And it came about in about the 5th century. And its practices are connected to specific lineages of Buddhism, and the lineages of the teachers going down from the Buddha down to modern day. And they are usually referred to as like Tantra Buddhism, but they practice things like mantras and mudras and mandalas. And it's really the mantra that I wanted to talk about with the Vajrayana Buddhism, because they popularized the concept of repetition and visualization. So one of the core tenets of reaching the pinnacle for Vajrayana Buddhism is this concept of Buddha in all time and space. And this touches right back to the concept that we were just talking about of this 5th dimensional space. So through the practice of mantra and mudras and all of these very kind of sort of stringent tantras, like these instructions on how to get to enlightenment, one is supposed to be able to elevate themselves to a point of what they call Buddha in time and space, which is the same thing as, I would say, sunyata almost, where we're talking about this sort of liminal space between this world and this sort of the spirit world, or whatever world is outside of this, where you can start to create avatars. And Vajrayana Buddhism utilizes meditation techniques in which you create an avatar out of yourself in a sort of psychic space, but only once you're able to achieve this liminal space, like clicking out, like when we talk about the gateway stuff, when you get into that mind space of being able to tap into that 5th dimension, that is when you can start to construct a deity. They call it Deity Meditation. And you're supposed to construct yourself, see yourself as this deity. And by doing so, you're actually, like, kind of like Plato would say, you're actually taking some of that divinity back to yourself. And so again, this is through the practice of mantras, and I want to make sure that I hammer that in, because mantras and tulpas go hand in hand. Repetition is a very big thing about psychic creation, apparently. And so the idea of emptiness is very central to this Buddhist practice. And they believe that emptiness is the view that sees the world as being fluid and without ontological foundation or inherent existence, but ultimately a fabric of constructions. And because of this, tantric principles such as self-visualization as the deity is seen as being no less real than everyday reality. It says also that, but a process of transforming reality itself. So I can read that again. Because of this, tantric practice, such as self-visualization as the deity, is seen as no less real than everyday reality, but a process of transforming reality itself, including the practitioner's identity as the deity. And so this concept, it's actually known as here we go again, Nirmanakaya. And it's the physical manifestation of Buddha in time and space. And it's in Vajrayana Buddhism, it's described as the dimension of ceaseless manifestation. And so ultimately, it would be the ability to create a mind-made body, which is called a manomaya kaya, as one of the fruits of contemplating life. So this is the sort of foundation that creates the concept of a tulpa in Theosophy. One of the creators of the concept of tulpas actually goes to Tibet and learns this type of meditation from Tibetans, then brings it back and creates a sort of Western religion out of it. But did you guys have anything you wanted to add about this Vajrayana Buddhism?
So it almost like reminds me of like a very tightly bound hologram that you create, right? Like going back to that gateway stuff, but only in the sense of instead of creating like a whole reality, you create a single being within that reality, like the deity meditation stuff.
Yeah, and then through the deity, basically, the philosophy is that by building yourself into a deity in this, what was it called? It's called the dimension of ceaseless manifestation. In building that deity in that space, you then kind of transform yourself in the physical world as well, which I think is a really fascinating concept, which, is a good sort of meditative concept, because if you think about it, people change in just the same way, right? We conceptualize an idea of a better self, and then through that conceptualization, we're able to bring that into the physical world, whether that's, obviously it's usually in the third density, it's due to effort. But, perhaps you can just meditate yourself into a god. That would be pretty cool.
I mean, it would be all like psyche based, right?
Yeah,
like
it would be.
You can't get buff doing this stuff.
No, definitely. But your avatar will be ripped.
Yeah, right.
Although I do wonder about like the people who think a lot. They think so much they learn how to do sciencey stuff that can alter their genetic codes. And like there's that guy that gives himself injections, and he doesn't work out at all, but the one arm with injections, it gets buffer. And like that all generated from a thought, which is kind of cool.
It's kind of interesting too. So starting off as thoughts. My brain just went in like 10 different directions at once. So sorry.
That's about right.
And
like
deities.
yeah, indeed. Like once you start to create a character, right, for yourself, or create an ego, you kind of, it all starts off from like a single thought form, right? Like this molding of a mask, and the mask be the persona you push out into the world. The world is a stage. You can assume everybody's acting, blah blah blah. But it becomes interesting though is that during medieval times, like the Christian set kind of saw all actors as being possessed by demons because their personalities would shift so strangely. Which then we kind of get back to this notion of tulpas, right? These thought forms that can exist as sentient things, and that can end up having their own set of actions, their own set of thoughts, I guess. And then you connect that to tulpas possessing somebody, and now you have a demon.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely you do. Or an angel, or any other sort of mystical entity that you can think of. I do like the concept of actors, each character being a tulpa in of itself. I think that that's a good real world example of what we're trying to grasp here, because think about somebody like Daniel Day-Lewis. He turns into a completely different person with every movie he does. And it's like you, and he acts like he's a completely different person when he's even just on the set. So it's like he's being possessed by that tulpa and only releases it when the work is done. And sometimes it takes him a while.
And then even think about your common day-to-day person, right? In certain positions, I'm sure people have to undergo their own private personal transformations to take care of the job that day, right? The person you may interact with at the job site may not be the same person outside of that job site. And sometimes people use mantras like, what are those? The positive affirmations, right? Like, I won't be afraid, I'll be successful, whatever. It's pretty much just that, or this that we're talking about, but in practice, right? You're going to that dimension of ceaseless manifestation. You're pulling that thing down. You're creating yourself as a deity in the sense that you're getting closer to the person you want to be for that particular situation, which in itself is divine, I guess. So you're working your way towards that deification of yourself through this practice. And it's something that I guess everybody does on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. In little micro ways, for sure.
And that's what stuck out for me was just the emphasis on repetition, because it just makes so much sense. With repetition, you actually route neural pathways. You have neuroplasticity because whatever you put your attention and focus on, you magnify. And just thinking about like mantras, and even like in the Catholic Church, you have to do Hail Marys. And then you think about like how awful it was for kids that had to do standards if they were like repeating the same bad thing over and over again. Like, I suck because I stole Timmy's pencil or something. I don't know what they used to write, but you know what I mean? Like it's just
usually it's something like, I will not steal Timmy's pencil.
Oh, okay.
Because they're trying to train you out of the behavior, not reinforce it.
I'm trying to I remember I had to do like 250 standards or something like that.
Gosh.
When as a kid, it's like, I can't even remember what I said I wouldn't do anymore.
What a
that
hilarious
neural pathway has
punishment.
Gone away. Oh, I hated it. I would just like write the same word over and over, go down the whole paper.
Yeah.
I.
I would start off
Protest.
small and then get really big. So like I would start off very, very tiny and then just gradually get really big, really big.
It sounds like you're losing your mind a little bit there.
Pretty much, yeah.
The only time I used wide ruled paper. Every time it was college ruled, super thin lines, but not for standards. Keep the nice fat chunky line.
And it's like that notion of repetition building character is a thing called discipline, right? Like you repeat the same patterns over and you become disciplined in different things. But it also works for like mathematics. Like if you want to get good at math, the simplest thing to do is to do every problem in the math book. I guarantee you won't suck at math if you do that.
That's true. It is very true. But yeah, so I wanted to lay the groundwork there because now we're going to talk about the actual tulpas, which there's actually very little information on. But I just found a book. It's called Thought Forms, and it's by a theosophist. I forget her name. But I'll look it up later. But basically, the concept of tulpas really comes from this book, Thought Forms, and it's one of the leading theosophy books. Again, theosophy being this sort of pseudo religion. Think of New Age religion. A lot of New Age religion stems from theosophy, but this was back in the early 1900s when European explorers were going to the East and learning about Buddhist mysticism, Hindu mysticism, and then bringing this sort of amalgamation of all of these ancient wisdoms back to Europe and trying to create their own religions out of it. And so theosophy is one of those religions, which practices a lot of Buddhism techniques, a lot of Hindu techniques, some, Asian Chinese techniques, things like that. But really kind of hodgepodges them all together and tries to create like a universal field theory for religion. Basic concept is that kind of like a Unitarian, I guess, right? Where it's the core philosophy of theosophy is that all religions are saying the same thing and they're telling the same story. They're just doing it from different cultures. Which, I mean, is not an incredibly bold statement to make, but I guess back in the 1900s it was. No.
Yeah. Well, they didn't have the internet, right? They
Yeah,
didn't
that's
have,
true.
The ability to collect all this information.
Right.
And then
right.
I think, how old is anthropology?
That's a good question.
Doesn't it
Probably
start off in like
1800s.
Yeah, so now we're just getting to the point where we're comparing cultures and able to look at them
Right.
in a way that you can do a step back. Obviously, anthro has its own dark places that nobody talks about anymore. But yeah, no, it's not a bold statement anymore. But I think back then it was probably pretty big.
Yeah, I would say so too. That's probably why Theosophy caught such fire in not just Europe, but also in the Americas as well. It had a very small blip on the radar, all things considered, but some interesting concepts come out of Theosophy, and the Tulpas is one of those. And again, it's sort of this blend of maybe Platonic forms mixed with Buddhism, mixed with some other cultures as well. But a tulpa is a concept in Theosophy of a being or object which is created through spiritual or mental powers, and modern practitioners use the term to refer to a type of willed, imagined being, which practitioners consider to be sentient and relatively independent. Tulpas are said to have thoughts, emotions, and personalities separate from their hosts. And people who have one or more tulpas are tulpamancers. And tulpas can be created either with a collection of meditation techniques or even accidentally when somebody has an imaginary friend that persists later in life. I love this idea. Like, could you imagine if your imaginary friend just never went away?
Dude.
Do you think he gets older? Like, do you think do you think he or she gets older? Or it gets older? Does it age?
I don't know. I don't think it would. I mean, maybe it depends on what the imaginary friend is. Like, a lot of kids have like animals as imaginary friends, or, I don't know a lot of people who have humans as imaginary friends.
So, did you have an imaginary friend?
I was trying to think about it, but I definitely talk to myself a lot, as if there were other people around, but I don't know if you can regard that as an imaginary friend, because I never created a form, I guess. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. I never created an actual form for the imaginary character, but I did kind of act as a kid as if there was somebody around me.
Yeah.
Or something.
Baylor, did you?
I had a version of myself that lived in the mirror. And so I would talk to it and I would be like, what's happening on your side of the mirror? And I used to always imagine that their side of the mirror was somehow like totally different, because like, if you ever notice, like in a mirror, you can, let's say, okay, the door's to your right and the mirror's like, perpendicular to the door. If you look into the mirror, you can actually see outside the door, but through the mirror, right? So I used to always think that was like another world, and that whoever was in the mirror was like a different me living somewhere awesome.
Yeah, I used to call that mirror world.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I used to like tap on the mirror and try to get through it. I guess even like before the Matrix. So like just like tap on ding ding ding.
But do you remember the malls going up the escalator, and they would always have mirrors on both sides, and it looked like you were going through like an infinity?
Oh my God, I loved it. I would go up and down the escalators while my mom shopped and be like, I'm just gonna be over here. I'd be like, ooh, it's so cool. There's like so many of us. That would be our conference.
Yeah.
What was the point of that? Like, it's just like having one of those what do they call them, infinity fountains or something?
Yeah, I guess it was like cool, but it was it is very strange. Almost all escalators at the mall. It was usually inside like a Macy's.
Mervin's.
Yes. Yeah.
And you could feel bad about spending all that money you don't have.
Right.
Staring at yourself.
Just look at yourself with all your bags and your Cinnabon.
Yeah. Retail therapy doesn't work for me. That's why I'm the harshest judge.
I haven't had had a Cinnabon in like a decade. Oh my god.
Dude, Cinnabon was the thing. That was the only reason I was okay with going to the mall for 5 hours. 'Cause my mom and my aunts would just window shop. They wouldn't even buy stuff. They would just go to the mall to look at things. And as a child, it's like torture.
Yeah.
Torture.
I would always try to find the one store and like try to stay in that store for as many hours as possible. But early on, it's just being drugged through the mall.
Oh yeah, I used to hide in the little the clothing carousels.
Those were the best.
Yeah,
Those are the best.
then they put me on a leash.
I think I knew this. They did leash you. You're not joking.
Yeah.
Like you had the monkey, like the backpack with the little.
No, it was in a backpack. It was a wristband that was attached. That was attached to like a coiled, like a telephone cord almost.
I feel like most of the kids that saw the kids leashed like that were just like, "Oh, you poor thing."
Yep.
I was a feral child. I would just get lost purposely anytime I had to go to the mall.
It's the only thing you could do. Like
It's
that
pretty
or
much all
Target.
you can do. Yeah, hide from your parents. That's what that was.
Yeah, it becomes the game.
Yeah,
Did you
and then
have
just
an
like spy
imaginary-
on them without them noticing.
Oh, that'd be the best.
Yeah.
Mike, did you have an imaginary friend?
You would think I would because I was like an only child growing up, but not really. I definitely played like different roles whenever I would play with toys and stuff. Like I had strange toys. Like I had a whole little like a grocery store thing with a little basket and little fake groceries, but I would be the cashier and the customer. I would like run around and I would like talk to myself
You're like
in different
Bugs
places.
Bunny.
Yeah. You know, in the second grade, our teacher had like a little kitchenette and a little cash register. And like, for the love of God, why was it so like all the kids would try to finish work
Training
early
you to be a
that they could.
consumer.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it just was so great to be like, oh, here, $2. Here, let me give you 2 coins back. I don't know, like, ching, and to just pretend to be like the humans you see. I don't know. It's just funny. Guys,
And then
I
it's-
still remember.
And then it's weird when you get older. Like I was a cashier. I did not like it.
sucks.
Yeah.
You didn't even
Yeah.
like contract that. I
Why
did
was
not
this a
like it.
child's toy?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Why did I love it as a kid? It's like not fun
Accept
anymore.
your future lot in life. Now go be a cashier. Learn to enjoy it.
Okay, so let's get back onto the Tulpas and particularly the book Thought Forms. And I got the author here. It's A. Besant and W. Leadbeater. That helps. But in the realm of Theosophy, the book was written in 1901, and it divides the concept of thought forms into 3 classes. Forms in the shape of the person who creates them, forms that resemble objects or people and may become ensouled by nature spirits or by the dead, and forms that represent inherent qualities from the astral or mental planes, such as emotions. And the term thought form was also used in Evan Wentz's 1927 translation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And the concept is also used in Western practices of magic. Occultist William Walker Atkinson and his book The Human Aura described thought forms as simple ethereal objects emanating from the auras surrounding people, generating from their thoughts and their feelings. He further elaborated in Clairvoyance and Occult Power how experienced practitioners of the occult can produce thought forms from their auras that serve as astral projections, which may or may not look like the person who's projecting them, or as an illusion that can be cast that can only be seen by those with awakened astral senses, quote unquote. The spiritualist Alexandra David Neal stated that she had observed these thought forms and mystical practices in 20th century Tibet. And she describes tulpas as, quote, magical formations generated by a powerful concentration of thought, unquote. And then David Neal believes that a tulpa could develop a mind of its own, quoting, once the tulpa is endowed with enough vitality to become capable of playing the part of a real being, it tends to free itself from its maker's control. According to David Neal, this happens nearly mechanically. Just as the child, when her body is completed and able to live apart, leaves its mother's womb. And then she also says that she has created such a tulpa in the image of a jolly Friar Tuck-like monk, which later developed a life of its own and had to be destroyed. David Neal raised the possibility that her experience was illusionary, saying, quote, I may have created my own hallucination, unquote, though she says others could see the thought forms that she had created. So that's just a rundown of the concept of tulpas and thought forms, originating from kind of this 20th century Tibetan mysticism, utilizing that Vajrayana Buddhism and repetition to create psychic sort of thought forms and entities. And I think that they take it a step further into the occult by adding the twist of them taking on a mind of their own and kind of becoming sentient. And I like that she says it's like mechanical. Like once you start the process of creating a tulpa, it's almost inevitable that they will eventually separate from you and become their own thing.
Cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
You don't like it.
Why don't you like
Crazy,
it?
man. Well, I just watched Freddy Krueger, like the 2020 version, and the whole idea of like dream entities affecting us in the real world, and like, yeah, I don't know. I just go to a scary place.
No, it's fine. I mean, this is like, I think we all as people fear either coming across something that's out of control or being out of control ourselves, right? And these tulpas, if you make them in your mind, then they might be part of you, and that part of you might be out of control if it starts to do its own thing, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just like it's kind of almost like it's kind of like a mirror. Whoa, that's weird. Okay, so you go into this absolute to create the tulpa, then the tulpa becomes a sentient being with a shred of the absolute inside of you.
Yep.
It's weird.
And
Strange.
it becomes some weird part of you, right? Like there's there is, I guess I can say now, like as an adult, I definitely get closer to this sort of practice than anything else. Like there's a base version of me that has its likes and dislikes and can interact with the world in a certain way. Then there's certain situations where I have to either become more strict, right? Like when watching somebody's kids or something is the very easy example, right? You have to change your personality a bit so you let that tulpas kind of go. But in more extreme cases or scenarios, you have to almost like you might lose some sense of control within yourself. Let that utility monster out of the cage, so to say, you know? And you, like, it's still part of you. So when you look in that mirror, it's still some version of you, whether it be like one sub-personality or a set of sub-personalities that make up the larger collection of you.
This is one really long psychic roundabout way to prove Nietzsche's quote right. It's like he's staring into the abyss and then it stares back at you.
Keep staring though.
Yeah.
Keep
Jump in there.
Yeah.
But jump in there. See what becomes
See
a
what's
little
going
scary.
on. Shake
Yeah,
it
it's
up
a leap
bit.
of faith in yourself.
Why not? And so to go on a little bit about thought forms and the authors, and they wrote like many theosophists, and this is why I asked you guys the question. They were convinced that thoughts are things, and that the task of their book was to help readers understand this concept. And the book states that the production of all thought forms is based on three major principles. Number one would be the quality of thought determines the color of the tulpa or thought form. The nature of the thought defines the form. and the definiteness of the thought determines the clarity of the outline. So all of that to say that, like in order to create a tulpa, you want to have an idea that is of quality and be determined and clear about what you're trying to create in order to create an effective tulpa. And the authors define the following 3 cases of thought forms. They say that number 1, which is that which takes the image of the thinker. When a man thinks of himself as in some distant place or wishes earnestly to be in that place, he makes a thought form in his own image, which appears there. Number 2, which is that which takes the image of some material object. The painter who forms a conception of his future picture, builds it up out of the matter of his mental body, and then projects it into space in front of him, keeps it before his mind's eye, and copies it. The novelist, in the same way, builds images of his character in mental matter, and by the exercise of his will moves these puppets from one position or grouping to another, so that the plot of his story is literally acted out before him. And number 3 is that which takes in form entirely of its own, expressing its inherent qualities in the matter which it draws around. So those which we give specimens. Okay, so I don't know what that meant, but that which takes the form entirely its own, so expressing its inherent qualities in the matter which it draws around it. So like a golem almost, or like some sort of emotional psychic complex. But yeah, there are different ways that the tulpa or the thought form can be created, but there are 4 main ways. One is with emotion. We've talked about this kind of previously in the conversation about how emotions and thoughts kind of interplay with each other. So emotions can be, or like Ayla's concept of her reliving her injury. That creates its own little tulpa every time she goes back to that place and imagines herself hurt again.
Fun.
Yeah, same thing with experience, having that experience, or, like you think about like the concept of a memory, right? So you think about an experience that you have, then all of a sudden you're kind of like creating this projection of yourself in that memory. I don't know if you guys think of memories that way, but, to me, it's like if I'm conceptualizing a memory, I'm kind of like projecting my current self into that memory, kind of almost third person view of the self that I was in that memory.
I gotcha.
Yeah. And then, of course, meditation, which we talked about with the Buddhism and mantras and repetition. All of that kind of creates that psychic energy needed to create that entity within the ceaseless manifestation zone. And then music, interestingly enough, which probably links to the concept of repetition as well. As well as evoking emotion and also experience. So music can be kind of a good sort of catch-all or key that encompasses all of those emotional experience and even meditation / repetition. But those are the modalities or the modes in which tulpas or thought forms are generally created. Of course, everybody has a different way of doing this. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the concept of thought forms. I want to get into a couple examples of tulpas in sort of mythology and the occult. But do you guys have anything that you wanted to bring to the table about the concept of thought forms?
It's interesting how you need to like subject yourself to some sort of trance in order to create them.
Mm-hmm.
Or how emotions are these things that within like the dimension of language are become pretty difficult to describe, right? Like where we have works of art, for example, right? They're all supposed to communicate some notion of emotion sometimes. But the thought form seems to be born from like this primordial
ooze.
Yeah.
Emotion,
that 5th dimensional thing. Which has a very visceral reaction with the consciousness that is experiencing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Ayla?
Oh man, I don't want to go down too many rabbit holes, but I definitely do feel like it's a little bit creepy to me, the idea that you would have a thought form and then eventually like it doesn't need you and it goes off and does its own thing, and it's just like
This is the number one reason I haven't created a Tulpa.
Do you guys have like abandonment issues? Is this what this
No,
is?
I'm afraid it'll kill
My
me, dude.
Tulpa.
I'm afraid my Tulpa will kill me. Seriously.
Well, okay, but like
There's
going back
nothing wrong
to
with
that.
that.
Yeah,
Well,
I kind of want to live.
well,
But
going
what
back
if
to
you
that.
might make something new? I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you at like the perfect time.
I know you do. I'm like Kung Fu Panda when he like gives up trying to see the show and he's just like, go ahead though. So,
No, like just like not your actual physical self, but your psyche. You know, but I'm big on like death and rebirth type cycles of the self, right? And it seems like the Tulpas is one of the ways to do it, right? Like if you put all of the thing of your old self, whatever that is, with these 4 pinks that are given to us through emotion, experience, meditation, and music, then you can create something that no longer needs you, and maybe you don't need it entirely, right? Like your past self. There might be some good things that you want to keep, some bad things that you want to throw away, or maybe some bad things that you want to keep so that you don't recreate this Tulpas, but then you let that past self kind of just run off into the wild somewhere.
Yeah. And actually, I'm glad that you brought that point up, because we will be talking about an instance of being able to do that. But Ayla, let's get your
well, I
your
think
ideas.
I'm trying to remember. I mean, yeah, I think the only thing was just the meditation that you mentioned earlier, and about the thought form being like a deity form of yourself. And so if the thought form breaks off, but you've hyped it into some like deity, which you might not have hyped it, it could just be like a deity of like
No, it doesn't
something
have to
really
be a
normal.
deity either. That's just through
Right.
the deity meditation.
Right. But again, it's like, yeah, I feel like you'd have to be really freaking intentional. And at the same time, it seems like they can form without intentionality too. So, I don't know.
Well, yeah, we certainly can see kind of the modern iteration of the collective consciousness creating tulpas in the form of memes. Those aren't necessarily physical beings, but they do tend to take a mind of their own, and they do tend to package a ton of psychic data and just information in general into a very digestible bit. And they kind of run away, when things go viral. I kind of think of it that way too. It's like, your tulpa goes viral, and then it just kind of has a mind of its own.
Almost like a religion too, right? Like a religion goes viral and all of a sudden it starts off as a cult or something. What is like the very smallest form of religion called? A cult?
Like a sect. Yeah.
And then it starts to spread, and if the ideas are good enough, or if it catches on to people, then you have this mimetic viral spread of those ideas.
Yes. Yeah. And then that sort of complex becomes a tulpa in itself. When you think about, like a religion, you would conceptualize the figurehead of that religion as kind of the tulpa, like Jesus would be that for, Christians, and God for Catholics, and Muhammad for Muslims, Vishnu and Kali for the Hindus. Like we can definitely see how, think about it. Are gods just creations of, are they just manifestations of psychic energy?
Yeah. And it's also this idea of not being able to control this sort of power, right? Because we can relegate this thing as a power, like a tulpamancer. It reminds me a little bit of like the Force, right? Like you can use the Force inherently without knowing what it is at all, but you may not have the best effects.
Yeah.
If you train your mind and train yourself, then over time you get better and more advanced skills in forming these thought forms and um, uh, regulating them to the best of your ability.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. Yeah. Without a doubt. All right. Well, before we wrap up, I wanted to give two instances of tulpas, or this kind of vague thing what we're speaking of. One is the egregor, which comes from the ancient Greek and is an occult concept representing a distinct non-physical entity that arises from a collective group of people. And historically, the concept referred to angelic beings or watchers and the specific rituals and practices associated with them, namely within the Enochian traditions. But more contemporarily, the concept has referred to a psychic manifestation or a thought form occurring when any group shares a common motivation being made up of and influencing the thoughts of the group. The symbiotic relationship between an egregor and its group has become compared to the more recent non-occult concepts of the corporation and also the meme. So yeah, I like this idea that the egregor modernly would be considered a corporation, because that's exactly what an egregor is. It's a collection of humans all feeding a sort of larger abstract concept. So you think about like everybody that works in Google, they are creating the Google, or any other corporation really. But yeah, I mean, do you guys have anything on that? Do you think that there's any humans out there that are created by a group of people?
No.
I mean, there's like cover stories for people, right? Like, and based off of the Ramones, right? The music. None of them knew really how to play music until they just like had that look. So then they were given this sort of personalities. There's also some
yeah.
going back in the day, there are some Hollywood actors who were kind of given different personalities to portray out in public.
Yeah, that's true.
That could be a tulpa inhabiting a person that was made by a committee.
Mm-hmm. Right? A focus group. Yeah.
Oh God, could you imagine that?
Yeah. I mean, that's what PR is, right? I mean, you have a focus group of people that try to create a public image of you as a corporation or just an individual, which is kind of this illusory, construction of who you actually are.
Yeah.
Or even, like a deified version of yourself.
Yeah, I think internally we might be a corporation in ourselves that tries to push.
Or a corporation of bacteria and fungi.
Oh, that's for sure. You know how many life forms are? You know how many tiny spiders are on your face right now?
All the time.
Yeah. But you push your personality out there, your persona, and you try to push the best version of yourself, right? The general idea, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it's interesting that you have this idea of a egregor. Specifically, the difference between a tulpa and an egregor, I think, is just the collective of people creating it. A tulpa can be created by one person. It seems as an egregor needs to be created by a group of people, a collective. And that's where you get into concepts of religion, angels and demons and God and all that stuff. Because you have all of this group of people that believes in one thing, and they devote all their psychic energy into that thing. So it's almost like an Ouroboros. It's like, what came first, the group of people dumping their psychic energy or the God?
Well, that makes me think about like alien disclosure, because didn't incidents of UFO sightings spike all throughout last year and this year? And it's probably because mainstream news outlets were finally reporting on this stuff, and more people are feeling like legitimized and thinking about it. And maybe all the thinking manifested these still to be identified.
Are you trying to say that our entertainment and media shape the collective consciousness of Humanity?
Oh,
Some-
did I? No. Oh, why
No,
would
I'm
I?
kidding.
That's not a thing.
That can't happen ever. Oh man. But no, I think you have a good point, Ayla. Yeah, like it is a real thing, you know. Like we do let our media sort of, and I use media in a very loose term, you know, movies, TV, news, all of that stuff. We do let it kind of shape our conceptualizations of the reality around us. And yeah, I guess if you could think, you know, think of like the War of the Worlds, right? When they did that on the radio and made everybody believe that there was an alien invasion, and then chaos ensues. Yeah, so it's like, yeah, it's like one of those things where if you can get enough people to believe something, it kind of does become real.
Or even like The Exorcist, that created a whole lot of other like psychoses and issues for people.
Or Jaws kept people out of the ocean for a very long time. Yeah.
And just go back to that UFO disclosure, especially if like these things run on any sort of conscious energy, you know, the more people that start to think about it, the more that the thought form manifests itself into something that might actually be real.
Yeah, that gets creepy. That gets really creepy. It's like, what are we summoning?
Collectively on accident, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not entirely on purpose. But I do wonder if like the Tulpas is like grows into the egregor. If that's sort of natural for these sorts of hive minds of thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible that you could get, you know, somebody's tulpa to be sort of adopted by multiple people, and then it becomes a sort of complex instead of just a singular thing.
Yeah, because like at least as far as I know, you have like entrepreneurs start off with their own singular idea, right? The Tulpas, the thought form that this company is going to be like this and do this thing.
Right.
And then eventually it spreads to multiple people, where it becomes an egregor and definitely out of the control of the original proprietor.
Right. Yeah. And definitely reliant on more and more people's psychic, you know, input in order to maintain itself.
Yeah. And effort.
Yeah, definitely lots of effort. Yeah.
Like credit.
Like
psychic credit.
Psychic credit.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's talk about actual credit. We just made that up. Like, you know what you think?
But yeah, I mean,
hard.
Yeah. But yeah, so before we wrap up, I wanted to talk about one more, and it's called the Servitor. And this is actually within the school of chaos magic. And it's a Servitor is a psychological complex deliberately created by the magician for a specific purpose that appears to operate autonomously from the magician's consciousness, i.e., as if it were an independently existing being. As a Servitor is an entity specifically created by the magician to perform a set range of tasks. By deliberately budding off portions of our psyche and identifying them by means of a name, trait, symbol, after which we can come to work with them at a conscious level. Servitors can be created to perform a wide range of tasks from the specific to the general, and may be considered as expert systems which are able to modify themselves to take into account new factors that are likely to arise whilst they are performing their tasks. They can be programmed to work within specific circumstances or operate continually. When a complex of thoughts, desires, and intentions gains such a level of sophistication that it appears to operate autonomously from the magician's consciousness, as if it were an independent being, then such complex is referred to as a servitor. When such a being becomes large enough that it exists independently from any one individual as a form of group mind, then it is referred to as an egregor. And so alternatively, a magician may choose to create servitors from negative aspects of their psyche, such as habits, shortcomings, faults, and revulsions, rather than positive desires or intentions. And in doing so, they can interact with those traits as personal demons and bind or banish them to eradicate them from the psyche. So that goes back to what you were mentioning, Mike, about creating a tulpa out of the things that you may want to actually get rid of. I find that really actually pretty fascinating.
Like that notion. Yeah, it's like the Solomon notion, right? To bind those demons and eradicate them. But it's a good way to internally externalize those sorts of negative psychological or psychic aspects of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to think of the servitor as the brooms in Fantasia. You know how Mickey steals the sorcerer's hat and then commands all the brooms to start, or the mops to start cleaning the sorcerer's chambers. Like those are little servitors. They improvise and they continue their tasks even when the magician isn't focusing on them. Yeah, we all know how that ends up. So
it's kind of like when you're driving places, right? And you have your little driving servitor that you're somewhere else in your mind, and then you're on autopilot and you're just sort of there.
Right. Absolutely.
There's a notion too of a dissociation engine where you can disassociate from parts of yourself and create these little servitors to either do your bidding or, like I said before, kind of let it become a tulpa and let it do its own thing and go away if it's negative. But it starts with this the ability to create a servitor, or the ability to disassociate from your current self.
Certainly. Yeah. Ayla, anything?
No, not on that one. I think I'm still kind of it's such a new concept to me, the idea of like thoughts becoming like actual forms. And I'm wondering back to like the Plato, Aristotle, ideas and just how that would play into this world, right? Because like on one hand, the thought forms are generated by us, but on the other hand, it's like they're being called from the ether. And I don't know which is better. They're both kind of terrifying.
I think they're both kind of saying the same thing in regards to something like a tulpa. It's just that like Mike described earlier, it's like, whether do you want your absolute to be filled with these abstracts or just complete nothingness?
Yeah.
And as you're existing, I think they don't have, there's no like exclusive or here. It's not like you gotta pick one exclusively. You can use them both in different situations to express either yourself or see reality in the way that you choose. I don't think there's a necessarily right or wrong answer.
Yeah, certainly.
It's just more tools you can add to your existential toolkit.
There's no wrong way to eat a Reese's.
If you throw away the peanut butter part.
That is the wrong way.
Or eating the entire bag and leaving none for your wife.
Oh,
Who
snap.
got the receipt?
Oh, snap. I've been called out.
Yep.
Shots fired.
Shots were fired.
Just blame it on the dog.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Don't worry.
Well, we were dog sitting one day, and it was a Halloween sort of time, and the dog we were sitting was like really small, and he ate like a whole bag of I think they were Butterfingers, like Butterfinger minis. And yeah, he survived. Apparently milk chocolate.
Yeah, they're fine. Milk chocolate is not. No.
Yeah. There's very little chocolate
still
in
shouldn't
it.
have it. All right. Well, we are good to wrap up here. I have one more question before we go, and then we can sign off. My question is the universe a tulpa? Or an egregor?
I think it's both. I think the way that you experience the world is a tulpa. The way that you kind of interact with it. And then the overall, I guess this is like when it comes down to the subjective versus the objective. but the overall reality is an egregor. It's based off of like this collective idea of what your society is, what your norms are, blah blah blah. But it's you still have your own little personal tulpa experiencing the universe. And
Fair enough.
And if you're unconscious, then then the universe just is.
That's fair. All right. Well, do you guys have anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Are you going to make a tulpa anytime soon?
Nah.
Either of you?
I'm good.
I think I just make them all the time. Got nothing else to
There
do.
you go.
I know. I'm constantly thinking of like ideas for books, and I'm starting to worry that I could just be making thousands of tulpas.
Just make
Yeah.
sure they're like well defined and not like David Cronenberg tulpas. They just look all messed up.
Like half-baked thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, they're just like kill me, just
Yeah.
kill me.
There's like a Simpsons episode where I think it's like something manifests and it's like not functional. It's all messed up, and it's just like, please kill me.
Right.
All right. Well, if you guys are good to go, then we are good to go. All good?
Yeah, that was a fun one, Nick. That's like a lot to think about. Like, this is one of those shows that I know I'm gonna go back and listen to again and just be like, oh.
I am
like
glad. Yeah.
Make a servitor to do it.
There you go. Exactly. Yeah. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And we hope that you enjoyed listening out there on the internets. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us. We very much appreciate it. Please leave us a comment if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback, if you have any comments, any thoughts about this episode or any of our other episodes, please also consider giving us a subscription to our YouTube page. It would very much help us out. We're trying to build that audience and just give you guys some ponderous podcasts to pontificate on. And a little alliteration there. And we hope that you enjoy, and thank you so much for listening. Until next time, Cognonauts, you stay out there, and we will catch you on the next Exofathom. Good night.
Peace.
Later.